Welcome to Eternal Paradigm. Together we're uncovering the human experience and exploring physical, mental, emotional and spiritual stories with me, your host, Amy Ravel. Welcome to this episode of Eternal Paradigm. I hope you're enjoying your journey to find you. So in this episode, I had a conversation a few months ago now, so it was around Thanksgiving, with a gentleman who contacted me about mental health journeys. His name is Mike Bivens, and we had a kind of easygoing chat, really. It was lovely to hear his story and also to ask questions, to really get to know a person as if I'd just met them for the first time. And that's exactly what happened. So I met Mike and I literally asked him a load of questions. Now, what's really, really amazing about Mike himself is that he moved 2,000 miles away from his home in North Idaho to Texas in the middle of a pandemic. Now, it's been a pretty challenging time for everybody, just as things are. But then to make a life-changing decision to move from your home to a place that is so far away from home, where things are already different in the world, and then all of a sudden things are going to be a little bit more different too. But anyway, he did it. And he's also an avid board game collector. So in our conversation, it really was quite an interesting analysis, really, where I asked questions like around the kind of key events that have changed Mike's life or his perspective. And also, what books has he found really, really motivational and inspiring? How did he get, move from where he was living, his home, to a whole different area that he'd never even thought of moving to before? And as the story unfolds, and you'll hear Mike talking about this, is he moved because of a college course, or in the UK would say university, because he found the one that he wanted to do. And he's incredibly passionate. And when he speaks, you will hear him touching briefly on things around equality and why diversity is important, especially in the American education. I say the school, but what I mean is the university system. He talks about fraternities and sororities and how these aren't particularly prevalent across all universities in the UK. But this is quite a significant part of the culture in the American education system. And so Mike touches on this and what it was that made him move from the college course that he was studying, which was very different initially, to moving into a course that has more of an advocacy focus. So the conversation was really lovely. What's also incredibly interesting is when he talks about the three perspectives, the three moments that resulted in almost like a paradigm shift, where he realized that, people are giving ultimately. People are actually nice. And he's got this amazing story to tell. What's also lovely is that he's happy to tell it. He's happy to share it. And when he's talking, he is just so easygoing to listen to. And going back now to what the conversation was, there have been significant changes since Thanksgiving to now, especially in American politics. I won't dwell too much on those because you can always catch up on the news. Now, I wanted to get to actually talk to him and ask him more about these developments and where he stands on things. I haven't been able to. We haven't been able to get to that, but that's okay because it's his story that I'm interested in. And I'm not really sure how much his political stance on things would potentially change much because his story is his. Moving on from there, I'd like to introduce you to my guest, Mike Bivens, who is also a games master, a board game collector, and the mind behind the XperiaCast podcast as well. Just to add, remember to share episodes of Eternal Paradigm with your friends. Don't forget to follow on socials, and wherever you see a post or you see the episode, remember to subscribe, like, and share. Thank you very much. Enjoy listening.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name's Michael Bivens, but you can just call me Mike. I'm actually coming to you from Central Texas, and I currently live here in Central Texas attending Texas State University. I am studying student affairs and higher education. It's kind of the study of working at a university outside of the academic portion of it, so more student support services. I'm also a podcaster, and I'm just really excited to be here to be on the show and talk a little bit about myself.
Thank you. I'm really excited to have you because I have a barrage of questions. So tell me how you got to university where you are at now, and just tell me how you got to this point of where you are at now.
Yeah, and so I spent a lot of my undergraduate education thinking I was going to be a lawyer, and I got to my final year of my bachelor's program and I realized this just isn't for me. And I had a couple of mentors who sat me down and they were like, we're glad that you came to this realization. We think that student affairs is the perfect direction for you. You've had so much involvement in clubs and student organizations, and we think that you can take that, turn that around, and support undergraduate students as a professional. And so I was like, okay, that sounds like a great idea. And so I spent some time with them to kind of understand the field a little bit more. And of course, it was too late at this point to really put in applications to start right off the bat from my first graduation into a master's. And so I spent a year working at the university that I had just graduated from, supporting fraternities and sororities. If you're not familiar with that, if your listeners are outside the US, you're probably not familiar with it. Those are social collegiate groups of men and women who just come together, and for various purposes, their missions kind of differ from university to university. But ultimately, that year showed me that, yes, I would actually really enjoy this student support kind of service. And so I looked around for universities, and Texas State University came up as checking off a lot of the boxes I was looking for, that opportunity to engage with cultures far outside of what I had been used to growing up in Idaho, because Idaho is where I'm originally from. And so there were just a lot of important boxes that Texas State marked off. And so I eventually settled on this would be my decision. And I moved here, and that was 2,000 miles away from everyone and everything I've ever known. So it was a really big change for me.
That's brave. And how different is Texas from Idaho?
Very, very different. Idaho is not very diverse, especially I'm from the northern part. And so it's very much a singular kind of culture and dynamic. And coming here to Texas, there's just so much more diversity here in terms of ethnicity and race. And being in Central Texas, there's a lot of diversity in political beliefs that I'm just not used to from being where I'm from home. And so it's been very refreshing to be around so much diversity as far as just thinking and logic goes. It's been really helpful for me in taking the time to reflect on myself and grow and reconsider a lot of the aspects of my life. I'd always been so close to home and had always been in a very comfortable position as far as, I had a small group of friends, and that was good enough. And there was some growth, but not as much as I could have had if I had moved further away from home. And so being here so far away and having to make all new friends and kind of rebuild an entire life from scratch has been a wonderful opportunity for me to really think back on my life and find ways to grow and really change into the kind of person that I'm finding myself to be.
I'm fascinated because initially you had your sights set on potentially a legal career or studying law.
Mm-hmm.
What got you to that point?
That is actually a somewhat funny story. And so I had no idea what I wanted to really do as far as a career after college when I started. I just knew that I need and want to get a college degree. I was coming from a low income single parent household, and I knew that getting a college degree was like my ticket into, getting a better job, having a more stable life as an adult myself. And one that I would enjoy more. And so I had started off in business just because that was the go-to. You don't know what you want to do, go do business. And so eventually, end of my first year at university, I got a notice in the mail saying that there was a court case happening against my insurance because of a car accident I had gotten into several years prior. And so it was at the very end of when a lawsuit could happen. And so the plaintiff decided that, okay, I am going to go ahead and sue me and my insurance. And so I had to go through that whole process with my lawyer about, talking about the case, everything that happened that day, and just going through those whole proceedings. And the lawyer took a liking to me, and throughout the case, he involved me in discussions and jury selection, and really saw something in me saying, hey, I also think this is a good idea. And me not knowing what to do, I latched onto that. And so I took what was basically pre-law education in my undergraduate career as a result of, this car accident I got in when I was 16, and 3 years later had to sit through an entire court case through. So yeah, that's that story.
That's not that funny. You said there's a funny story, so I was like,
the whole thing. I went into law because somebody sued me. That's kind of
the
fun.
Punchline. Yeah,
there we go.
Oh, wow.
Everything was very minor. I want to clarify, there was no serious accidents. Everybody was okay. It was just that opportunity to get a little bit more money from the insurance.
Of course. Absolutely. All been there, I'm sure. Wow. Okay. And so actually getting to that point when you had that conversation at college, when there was okay, we think studying this or looking at this will be better for you. Did that sit right with you?
It did. At the time, I think it really did. I spent a lot of my undergraduate education really heavily involved with a lot of different student clubs and organizations, everything from social clubs to more academically centered ones. And then also with my fraternity, I had the opportunity to rebuild it from the ground up following a lot of hazing and drinking and alcohol allegations. And so that opportunity to rebuild a fraternity from the ground up was a really big catalyst in this too, and me realizing I can help other students do this exact same thing. And that realization fed right into my mentors sitting me down and saying, this would be great for you. And so it at the time, it did really sit well for me. And it seemed such the more natural, better option for me.
Yeah, definitely. Because you've lived it, you've done it. Cool. So apart from this move from Idaho to Texas, what other 3 events have occurred in your life that have resulted in I want to say, moments of clarity, pain, happiness, resulting in personal growth? Do you have those that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, definitely. I think one particular event, my family was the recipient of a Habitat for Humanity house. And Habitat for Humanity is an organization that builds homes for low-income families. And there's a whole qualification process that goes into that. And then the families actually get to help build their house. And it's just a really wonderful organization that makes a lot of real change for their lives and the communities that they're in. And so getting that house was definitely one of those moments that just really changed my life. And also it was my first opportunity to really engage or see what community service was or what that looked like. And after that point, community service became something that was really important to me and still is today. I've always taken community services really serious and tried to understand the actual impact it has on the community and really evaluating, is this opportunity something that's going to positively impact the community? And then taking the time to pursue that opportunity to get involved in my community and help them. And so I would say getting a house through Habitat, to sum it up, has impacted me in a way of having a much greater value of community service and understanding the importance of that. A second event that I've had that's changed my life, I had a very close family member who got addicted to drugs, and it created a very difficult rift between him and I. And that has continued to cause, even though the addiction is now gone and so much change has happened since that point, it still has left behind a rift in our relationship that impacts me, certainly. And it's been difficult to go through the healing process with that. And I think it's been over 10 years now. And I can say really in the last few months with me, it was moving to Texas and that opportunity to really start healing that we were able to begin fixing our relationship. So even though we're 2,000 miles away, I'm now able to start rebuilding that relationship with that person in the way of just personal injury that I've carried with me for a long time that's been difficult. But learning how to move past that has been really helpful for me. Absolutely. And I'd say maybe the third event I would talk about is my freshman year. When I joined a fraternity, I did experience a lot of hazing, and everything from sleep deprivation to excessive alcohol drinking. And there were just a lot of normal things that you might see in a fraternity hazing movie. I experienced. Thankfully, I say thankfully, but what I mean to say is it was mostly mental hazing and not so much physical, which I am appreciative of that it never went that far. But even so, that I did not realize the kind of impact it made on my life for several years now. And this is something that I had to talk to a counselor about, because I did not realize this caused a lot of mental health issues. As far as not trusting groups of people, because not knowing okay, they say they're my friend, but how do I know they're not going to use what I say against me, which was an experience that I had very common in my first year of undergrad. And so this was that hazing experience I talked about earlier, where following it, I had the opportunity to rebuild the organization from the ground up. And so this particular event left me with a lot to grow, reflect on, and heal from, which has ultimately been really great for me as far as just personal growth and coming to understand myself better. Yeah, I think that's what I'll leave on that story.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for sharing those. That really amazing. On when you talk about your second point in terms of healing and your relationship, I'm really glad to hear that. And in relation to your third point, I'm quite fascinated as an outsider, because fraternities, even though we have kind of clubs and groups at, I guess, university here, we don't really have a fraternity. And that the fact that your experience of that was quite difficult. How common do you think that is?
I would say, so professionally working in that environment for a year following moving to Texas opened my eyes to it a lot more. And so as my time here, I work in organizational conduct here at Texas State. And so I've read through a lot of records for fraternities and sororities. And so I've had a lot of experience with this. Of course, not nearly as much as, a majority of the professionals in the field, but it's far less common today than it was 10 years ago. And that's due in part to a lot of really high profile deaths that have occurred in fraternities. Those have really sparked a lot of recognition for the need to change and drive for that need to change. And so, yes, absolutely, hazing does exist in a lot of different forms and to different severities everywhere you go. But more and more people are coming to the realization that this isn't okay and that this isn't the thing that we should be doing. And so one thing to note is it is the undergraduate students who drive what a fraternity or sorority is. And so the better the people going in and joining these organizations, the better those organizations are, and the less likely that you see these issues pop up. And that's so hard because it's like, why would, somebody who's already a really good person want to join an organization where they could encounter this? And so it's difficult at times to have that argument. But in all reality, the more that we focus on making this change, the more likely that change actually does happen. And so it is widespread, but the severity of it has dramatically diminished even in, the last five years. There's been incredible changes in organizations stepping up and, publicly, undergraduate, we're talking 18 to 21, 22-year-olds stepping up and saying like, no, we're taking a stand against this and we're going to hold each other accountable. So there has been growth, but we're talking about a culture that has been developed for decades. And so it's a slow process for sure. And I do want to say for the Americans on here, or particularly those in a fraternity, I am coming from a historically white organization that has moved dramatically towards diversity initiatives, but that's a continual mission that is always having to be worked towards. So my perspective is coming from a different organization than what most people might be coming from.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, because you just kind of explained so much, about the culture, the thought process. And I think what really sticks out is, like you said, this has been happening for such a long time. There's an element of wanting to belong, of wanting to be accepted. And they're just basic human needs.
Yeah.
And so, sorry, go for it.
I was just say that's exactly why I stuck through it. I hated this and every moment of it, and I knew how wrong it was going throughout my freshman year. But like, I was so committed. I was like, I just want to be a part of this organization. And every day was another day where I was like, I went through so much more work. I'm going to stick through it. And by the time that I was finally saying I'm not about this, I looked around and there were so few first year members that I was like, if I leave, they're going to be going through this alone. And it got to the point where I was only there to try and help my friends so they wouldn't have as much of a burden placed on them.
Wow.
It's a very interesting social dynamic that
yeah. It's, I think, like you said, we usually see, frat movies, sorority kind of things happening on American popular culture, TV, movies. So to kind of see it from that perspective and hear it from yours is really fascinating. Thank you. So we're going to move on to books.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have 3 books, or have you read 3 books that are either on your list of kind of constant go-tos, or have they changed your perspective? And I break this down because I mentioned this before. Have any of these books changed your perspective on life, on what we perceive as success, and ultimately what your purpose is?
Well, I got 3 books.
Cool.
The first one I'm going to talk about is Felicia Day's Embrace Your Weird. It's a short interactive book where you draw in it, you write in it, you leave notes, you do these exercises throughout it. And it's all about just finding how to unleash your creativity and engage with your passions and thinking outside the box. And the reason this book is so important is I've always wanted to create content. I remember being like 8, 9 years old with my friends and talking like, oh, let's start a YouTube channel. And, such early days of YouTube. And, nothing ever happened. And so like I've always had this like burning desire to create content. And I've always felt like I don't know how to do it. I don't even know where to start. And, eventually I did just start somewhere, but Felicia Day's book really helped me kind of embrace this creativity and, go beyond what I was comfortable with, because I'd always felt like contained in this box because I like don't know how to think outside of it. I don't know how to freely express. And so this book just really helped me go beyond, what these limits that I had placed on myself. The second one is actually very, very recent. It's called Sexual Citizens, and this was more of like a personal growth development kind of reaction. It's reviews a study on sex, power, and assault on college campuses, and there's a lot of lessons to be taken from it, far beyond just college campus interactions between, a first year and a fourth year. It talks a lot about the freedom to pursue your own interests and why that's important and how to really define what those are. And so I took a lot from that, and it was a really big eye opener for understanding human interaction between those with power and those who don't have power or don't have as much. And so it was definitely impactful, and I continue to think back on it almost a year later, and it's something that I often reflect on and continue to try to understand better. And the third one, I'm going to go all the way back and talk about the very first Harry Potter book. This book, I had a librarian introduce it to me when I was in very early on in my primary education, and it completely opened up. It was the very first, fantasy, non kind of like realistic book that I had ever read. And she introduced it to me thinking that maybe I might be into it. Little did she know I would come to love all things fantasy and science fiction and alternate reality for the rest of my life. It completely set me down a path of engaging in a space, outside of the world of our own. And so to this day, like that's what a lot of like the content I try to create for myself revolves around sci-fi or this fantasy genre. And it was just really impactful on the kind of content that I so often enjoy.
Can you share a little more about the type of content or the sci-fi genre that you're kind of creating and putting out there? Like what's going on in your mind? What is it? I'm intrigued. I want to go in there.
Absolutely. So the big project I'm working on right now is I play Dungeons and Dragons with my friends, and in the world that we play in, I'm the dungeon master. So I'm the one who runs the games, who creates the world, creates everything in it. And so I had this like concept of a world I've created my own. And so a lot of my content creation lately has been developing it from the ground up. I've been looking into how to draw maps so I can better like understand like how to draw a world and to make it, semi-realistic with fantasy elements. I've looked into I've watched a lot of videos and read some research articles on like how does a culture develop a pantheon of gods and like how does that work out? And so to then better understand and translate that into my own fantasy world. And so I just had this idea of I want to create this fantasy world where it happens. And I just, the very first bit that I ever wrote about it was a flower. I was like, I'm going to start off real simple. I will create this flower that exists in this world. And then from there, I was like, well, what kind of properties does it have? Well, how does that impact, maybe in some sort of economy? And then, well, what does that economy look like in a country? And then, so it's just jumps from one place to the next. And that's kind of the process I've gone in developing this world. And so now that I've had a lot of opportunity in developing this world, the bit of content I want to do this next summer is I want to try and create a comic book about a character that exists in this world. And recognizing that it's a very niche idea, it would probably be web-based. But like this comic book is like this huge opportunity to me of like, let's bring this beyond just me and my friends and let's make this, let me try to bring this out to other people.
That sounds amazing. And so where do board games fit into all of this?
Well, gaming has been a very important part of my life, especially growing up. It was how my family spent quality time. I grew up in a single parent household, and we had moved My mom had moved very far away from most of her family when we were very young. And so we didn't really have a whole lot of family friends or, family to go visit. And so we spent a lot of time together. And we gravitated towards board and card games. And so I grew up seeing these games as that's how I connect with my family. And it became how I connected with some of my closest friends. And so as I grew up, I, started collecting more and more board and card games and learning that there's almost a whole culture behind board games of conventions and groups who come together to make these board and card games. And so what has started as just my interest and a way to connect with people has grown into a hobby of collecting games and reading up on the theory of play to better understand what is this connection between playing games and developing strong relationships with other people. And even looking at the history of games, it's blown up into this full interest into understanding even the dynamics behind, how to build a game. What is the game theory pieces being used in the creation of this game? And so it's became a very holistic interest, but it all started because that's how my family spent time together.
That's amazing. So do you think that when you're putting together these creative ideas, are they pushing the boundaries of the reality that we're living now? Or is it just, are you just imagining what is to come? Does that make sense? So I'm fascinated because I like how you just, were introduced to Harry Potter and it opened up this whole new world for you. My sisters absolutely loved Harry Potter and I found it so hard to get into. And, when I reflect on this, because my kids are obsessed, when I went to see Harry Potter here in the West End and I was just blown away, I was like, how did I not get into the book? It was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And yet I think I'm kind of I think I was just late. I was so late for this train. It's ridiculous because at that point, I just couldn't, I was too stuck in my head of how the world should be. I couldn't get into this world of what it could be, And so that's where my question's coming from because, did it kind of take you into this world of where we are at now? Or actually, we probably are living this way, but it's just people are seeing it in different ways.
I think originally, I think for a long time, it was almost as a way of escapism for me. And so I could dive, head first into this whole other world that is separated from our own, where reality could be, what I want it to be or what the author wants it to be. And it was an opportunity to exist somewhere other than where I was currently existing. And I think that is also the case with the world I'm creating now is it's so different from anything in this world. It's living, it's breathing, its history is ongoing. And, to an extent, much like J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter world that almost exists independent of her, that's the idea behind creating this world too, is that it can exist independent of me. And so it's this opportunity to go somewhere else completely different from where we're at and to explore or experience someone else's story through our own eyes. And so that's, part of why we play D&D with it is this world is something that exists elsewhere and we experience the stories of, say a soldier or a warrior or something of that. And it's a form of escapism, I think, where everything is just so different and wild and is free to go its own direction without being held to any kind of constraints of our current, the world in which we really do exist. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Okay.
It's absolutely, it's limitless. And that's what makes it almost real. Or the opposite to real, if you see what I mean. Yes, I do. That does make sense.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Last question. How do you feel about where you are at now, at this stage in your life? Because you've got some amazing stuff going on and you're kind of almost like personal realizations have been good, quite profound.
Mm-hmm.
So where are you at now, and where do you see yourself?
Yeah, honestly, I have not felt this good about being me in a really long time. And there were a lot of challenges when I moved here, being so far away from everything and everyone I knew, and moving here in the middle of COVID-19 pandemic. And so not having the opportunity, our parks were all closed. And so I couldn't just go sit out in the grass. I'm living in a small studio apartment and it's by myself. And so when I moved here, it was both a blessing and a curse. It was a curse because I felt so alone and I didn't have people to be with, and work was at the time virtual. And so I got up and, 5 feet away from my bed, I started working, and, 15 feet away is the bathroom. And so it was just very isolating. But the blessing part comes in of just like that opportunity to reflect and really grow and figure out who I am as a person. And so there was so much time in getting to do that once things started slowly opening back up and I was able to interact with coworkers and the people I go to class with, things were very different. I had so much time to reflect and grow as a person. And now I'm getting to make all these friends. And so I can honestly say that I have not felt this thriving in a very long time. And it's fantastic to be here. And I am so much happier of the person I am right now than the person that I was a year ago or 4 years ago. And so despite 2020 has been full of hardships for everybody, but I am just very thankful and glad that I am coming out of it so much of a better person, so much more development and time spent on just me than I think I would have ever put into myself had circumstances been different. And so and all these opportunities I'm doing right now, like engaging in this like world building process so I can write comics, working on my podcast, engaging in meeting new friends and interacting with people who have very different beliefs and ideas all around me and who come from different backgrounds. I could not be happier to be where I am right now.
That's amazing. Thank you. So will you come back and talk to me once your comic books come to life?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I would love to.
Oh, that would be amazing. Because I'd love to look at that as an exploration of escapism and the creative process of that, if you're cool with that.
Oh, absolutely. That sounds like a wonderful idea.
Yay. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Eternal Paradigm. Join me next time.